Lebris has never threatened an official for eating a sandwich. He has to be in this team.
Exactly, he's never threatened an official for eating a sandwich. Why would you have him as your manager?
Gab, you've got to decide. Hello guys and welcome to The Sportsman Untitled, and as you can see from the title, it is our playoff final special. I'm very excited for this one. I'm very excited to be joined by Gab Sutton, who's joined us for the final. Didn't turn up for the semi-final, but he's here now. Good to see. And Johnny from Roker Report. Johnny, how you getting on?
Yeah, living the dream, mate. Absolutely chuffed. Delighted to be here.
Yep, I'm not delighted you're here, but that's life. And Ollie from the Sheffield United way. Ollie, how you doing?
Yeah, absolutely buzzing. Looking forward to this one. Hopefully it's a different story to some of the stories that we've seen in the past at this stage. But yeah, I'm ready. I'm excited.
I'm excited too. Apparently, we all have to discuss the fact that we all chose Coventry as our playoff winners. So, Johnny, I think you're best placed to talk about this.
Well, I mean, Gav just destroying the set there. So I think, our record against Coventry was horrendous. We all knew that going in. Hadn't won against you at all since 2007. I think hadn't won away in, whatever it was, 50, 60 years or something. So for me, it was a bit of a numbers game, really. We were on terrible form. Mm-hmm. You guys were on a bit of a high, having beaten Middlesbrough on the final day to get in. I could easily have seen that momentum carrying you through. I think what was crucial for us was having the away leg first and the home leg second, I think, is what basically allowed us to get through there, because you don't have that moment with Dan Ballard in the 123rd minute and, a packed stadium, I like going absolutely berserk. You don't have that if you're at home first, do you? And the run we were on, if we hadn't had that away game where we could finally put that curse to bed and get a bit of positivity and a bit of belief going for ourselves, then I think it would have been a really different story. And I think you probably would be the one sat in my place right now, and I'd be sat at home crying somewhere. But yeah, for me, it was all about that momentum. I think we managed to stymie you in the first leg, and that control we got in the game, I think we managed to control defensively. I think we managed to kind of maintain really well through the two legs, and I think it could have gone either way. It wasn't like we outplayed you. I think you certainly outpossessed us and won the territorial battle, had chances. But I think, look, in the end it was two good teams on slightly different ebbs going into that game, and it was all just going to come down to who managed to seize the initiative first. I think we managed that, so that's what carried us through. So yeah, I'm surprised that we got through because of how I felt going in. I'm not surprised that we were able to win the games, though. I think it was always going to be reasonably even on paper.
And Gab, you were probably a bit more confident on the Sunderland point of view before the semi-final?
Yeah, I think that you can look at it different ways. You could look at it from a Sunderland team that had lost their last 5 games, not the form that you would have wanted going into it. You could also look at it that they'd had a couple of months to actually prepare for the playoffs, to rest and rotate. There was never any danger that they'd drop out of the top 6. And so, they've been able to kind of keep their squad in peak physical condition. So it didn't really surprise me that they put in a really solid defensive display in that first leg against away at Coventry, and then obviously finished the job at the Stadium of Light.
And Ollie, for finalists, you're not playing Coventry as you thought you would be. You did make it through your semi-final very easily.
Yes.
How do you feel about the prospect of facing Sunderland instead of Cov?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I was very sort of down on our chances against Cov. I thought that the way that Cov used set pieces, the way that he used balls into the box was really going to be difficult for United to deal with. It's a very different proposition now coming up against Sunderland. They're going to play this game in a very different way. I think if we look to the games that we played against each other in the season, they were so even. United won at Bramall Lane, you won at the Stadium of Light, and to be honest, both games probably could have gone either way. There were big moments both sides. We missed a penalty at the Stadium of Light. You missed one at Bramall Lane. I think it's going to be tight. I think it's going to be nervy. But I probably feel slightly more confident than I would have done otherwise. I think, we watched those games and you talked there about them being really even. Didn't think they were high quality games. I think it was very much two teams trying to figure each other out. And
would you say though, Ollie, Sunderland beat Sheffield United at their place on New Year's Day, and I would argue that in the game in November at Bramall Lane, I would say, although Sheffield United won through Tom Davies, I thought Sunderland shaded the chances in that game as well.
Particularly first half.
Okay, yeah, but I would say on balance across both games, Sunderland have had the better of it.
Just maybe by a smidge. I think it's a really close one. I think the game at Bramall Lane, first off, Sunderland in particular were excellent. I think they were absolutely outstanding and did things to us at Bramall Lane that nobody had done up to that point. You know, especially when they get the penalty, all the momentum's with them. They're in a fantastic position. So certainly they were really, really strong at that stage. I think at the stage in my life, though, it was probably a little bit more even. I think actually, you know, as the game went on, United were potentially the stronger coming towards the end because Sunderland were defending a lead. So it's naturally that's going to be the way the game plays. But I do think that you might be right, Sunderland might have just edged it. But I think it was two really well-matched teams, and United are a very different proposition to what we were on New Year's Day. I think, you know, the signings, the business that we did in January, and having seen the performances over both semi-finals and in the last few months, I think there's a lot for United to feel confident about going into this game, albeit that it all has to be caveated with the fact that Sunderland very rarely had anything to play for, and therefore were just getting themselves ready for this stage.
We'll do a deep dive into the actual final itself in a little bit. Gab, I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on the semi-finals in general, because we're seeing two very different ways of approaching a Championship playoff final. We've got Sunderland, emotion, fight, passion, 120 minutes at home, last minute, the euphoria of that.
Yeah.
And we had Sheffield United who won their semi-final after about an hour of the first leg.
Yeah.
What does this mean? Do we read anything into that?
I think no, because I think Bristol City are a bit of a level below Coventry City. I think in a different Championship season that was stronger, Bristol City might have easily finished in mid-table. It was just because so many playoff candidates dropped off. West Brom dropped off after Corberán left. Middlesbrough dropped off because they couldn't fight. They were so streaky and went on a long winless streak, if you like. So I think it really paved the way for Bristol City to get in with good form, but not necessarily being an outstanding side. So I always felt like, with respect to Bristol City and the progress that they've achieved, it's very difficult to compare Sheffield United's playoff semi-final with Sunderland's against Coventry, who have been one of the better sides in the league since Frank Lampard took charge.
Absolutely. And for you, Johnny, it's kind of... as I said to Gab, it's kind of emotions. Your emotions must have been all over the show the last kind of week or so. We're sitting here with a very calm Ollie Mann. How are you approaching this Championship playoff final from an emotions perspective?
I think, in general, for the majority of Sunderland fans, there's a big sense of, not relief, but just a sense of happiness to kind of be in this position. Not that people are not going to be wanting and, in some cases, expecting a performance and possibly a result. I think, we're going to be going there believing that we can win the game. But I think, from the position we were in last season, a lot of turmoil, a lot of chaos going on at the club managerially and in terms of the makeup of the squad and various things in the background off the pitch, and on the pitch it was pretty poor as well. So to have gone from that to where we are, and to have had that moment in the semi-finals, which obviously was just, it was phenomenal to be there and kind of be that little part of it in the crowd. We, I think, at this point now look at it as a little bit of a free hit in a sense, because look, we want to win the game, and we'll all be gutted if we're walking out of Wembley, at 5:30 or whatever on Saturday, not having won the game. But the Premier League it's an ambition, it's a desire, but it's not a necessity in the same way that I think it is for some clubs. Certainly, when you come down from the Premier League as Sheffield United have, and then you're on the parachute payments, then you maybe the money's that little bit more important. Whereas I think we're in a bit of a better position where we can look at it and go, right, we've got a great chance here. We've worked our backsides off to get into it over those 2 legs against Coventry. Let's go out and put a performance in and try and make people proud. But if it doesn't come off, we don't go up. That's okay. We can go again next season.
I half agree with you, Johnny, but I think they've had different challenges. So I think from Sunderland's point of view, jumping from 16th to 4th is a massive rise. But I think you've had advantages in the sense that this young squad was bubbling away nicely for a couple of years.
Oh, yeah.
And it just hit this brilliant peak in its development. I think Sheffield United, in theory, yes, they're a parachute payment team, but you look at the chaos around the club in the summer, and I think there are different challenges for Chris Wilder to navigate off the back of conceding 100 goals in 103, I think it was, in the Premier League last season.
I think it might have been even more than that. Yeah, it's, the way that we've come into this season, we came into a massive state of turmoil. Like you say, we were one of the all-time worst Premier League teams on coming down, and the trauma, the pain that comes through that, it's really difficult to try and overcome. And I think the job that the team have done, the job that Chris Wilder has done in overcoming that pain, huge credit in the way that we've come through this. At the start of the season, Gab, you went even further than I did, but we weren't predicting United to be in this position. I thought we'd be sort of 5th or 6th. You thought even less, sort of lower than that, bottom half. And so I think the rebuild that we've done is really underestimated in terms of the way that that's come together. However, there is still that overarching pressure that does come up behind you a little bit, and it is the parachute payments which ultimately drives that, because obviously you get 2 chances to get back. You get 2 opportunities where you go, right, we're going back to the Premier League. And if you don't, there's a financial cliff edge at the edge of that run. And obviously we've got the new owners in. They've come in now. They're going to commit significant funding. They're going to try and make sure that we can be a sustainable Premier League team. I'm sure that if we don't go up this season, it'll be a big summer for us anyway in terms of building a squad that's ready to go back. But I don't imagine they're here for the long term of running a club in the Championship. I don't think they're looking at this as a way of sustaining a Championship team around the top 6. We are going to need Premier League money again at some point. But as a fan, I don't think we're desperate for it. As a club, we'll take advantage of the parachute payments and the money that comes with it. But as fans, the experience, we're not that desperate for this. This is the playoff final that we can turn up and enjoy. We can focus solely on Wembley. Nothing else matters. We don't have to think about, where's the club at? We'll be fine for next season. We don't have to think about, wouldn't it be amazing? No, probably not. So we can just focus on the day itself. And that makes such a difference for a United fan, because we've gone into these with so much desperation in the past. There's no desperation this time. We're there to win a game of football and have our day at Wembley, which we feel like we've earned over the last 100 years since we last managed to get one. So, yeah, it's a different kind of pressure. That's probably why I seem calm, because it's a different kind of pressure this time, and it's one that it's the pressure of I just don't want to be hurt again.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? That's a really good point you make. I think it's the same with all the playoff teams. We've seen how abused those 3 teams in the Premier League get this season, and then they come straight back down. You experienced it. There's almost a case of we've had a great season. Yeah. We finished in the top 6. We can take or leave actually playing in the Premier League. Yeah. The reward, obviously, we all want to get there and we all want to be successful, but the reality is something else. You mentioned your pre-season predictions at the start there, Ollie. I'll come to you as well, Johnny. Compared to your kind of pre-season thoughts and feelings, this has clearly been above expectations for Sunderland.
Oh, 100% without a doubt, yeah. I mean, me personally, I thought I wanted kind of top 8, so maybe we could have pushed for the playoffs, but top 8 would have done. Top 10 kind of acceptable for, new head coach coming in, still a young squad, poor season last season. I thought that would have represented a level of progress, a level of stability, and something we could then build on, going forward. So to then end up finishing 4th, getting to the playoff final, and being able to have this Wembley day out, I think that absolutely has to represent a really, really positive season for Sunderland, and it gives us much more confidence going into next season now, regardless of which division we're in. Like you say, Ollie, I mean, we're looking at this Wembley day as just, look, if we go out and do it, great. If not, I still have full faith that we'll be kind of there or thereabouts next season. We'll lose players, but we'll lose players whichever division we're in. We'll get money in, we'll have money that we can spend, we'll be able to improve the squad regardless of where we're at. And whether we are playing our football in the Premier League or the Championship come August, I have full faith that the club are going to be making sensible decisions and really building with an eye on the future as they have done. And don't worry, going down as one of the worst teams of Premier League history, we've been there and done that as well. It all works out in the end. It's fine.
There's one man sat around this table who did have quite high expectations of Sunderland this season. Gab obviously predicted Sunderland to win the league and was ridiculed, mocked, I don't know, what words would you say? You were taking the mick out of a little bit. You've been proven nearly right. On Saturday, you could have predicted an unlikely promotion, Gab. Fair play to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think what I was really excited by was just I just anticipated the growth of that squad. So it wasn't particularly about the signings, although I thought Alan Brown would make it. It turns out he hasn't actually started that much for Sunderland. But it wasn't really the managerial appointment because I didn't know a lot about him. But I felt like Trey Hume, Dan Ballard, Dan Neil. I'm going to go through the whole squad.
Please go ahead.
I just felt all these players were just on this incline, and I think they're just about to hit that massive spike in their development, and that's kind of how it's played out.
Brilliant stuff. What a prediction. You also predicted Leyton Orient, by the way, to reach the playoff
final
back in November. That's why we have you on the show. One quick question before we dive into the actual match itself. If you could go back into the season and change one thing, Ollie, what would it be and why?
We'd win at Oxford. We'd win at Oxford and I wouldn't be here today. Yeah, it's a really interesting one because I think obviously we've had real peaks and troughs, I think, throughout our season, but we've had some amazing moments. I do think the biggest thing for us is if I could change one moment, and, you know, with all seriousness, be the injury to Harry Souttar. It would be Boxing Day. We sub Harry Souttar 30 seconds before he has to turn to try and get that ball. He doesn't go down injured, and we've got him for the last run, because with him in the team we were a massively different proposition and we just didn't concede goals, and I would love to have had him back. I would love to have him on Saturday. So yeah, if it was one moment that I could, divine intervention, we'd keep Harry Souttar fit.
Ollie, is that an area that you're a little bit apprehensive about? Because while you did brilliantly to keep Bristol City completely at arm's length for large periods of that tie, barring maybe first half an hour of the second leg, there's maybe a feeling that the defensive partnership of Anel Ahmedhodzic and Jack Robinson hasn't really been tested across those games, whereas Sunderland might have a bit more about them to possibly expose what's become a bit more of a defensive vulnerability in the second half of the season as opposed to the first half.
Yeah, completely. And obviously, you know, we talked about the January game on New Year's Day earlier this season, and Mayenda and Isidore had an absolute field day with Anel and Jack Robinson that day. The ball over the top, the pace that they'd got in terms of closing them down, forced huge mistakes from both players, and they never settled for the entire evening. And I think if Sunderland tried to do that again, if it's the same front two against Anel and Robinson, that's a huge weakness. And for me, that's the biggest threat to United's chances, because they are everything that we will struggle to defend against. And so finding a way to try and counteract them, hopefully the counter is Vinny Souza. He wasn't fit on New Year's Day, he wasn't playing. He can sweep up, he can cover, he's got the pace, he's got the power to be able to counter those two players, maybe, but certainly it's our biggest vulnerability by a long way. And not addressing that in January, if I can't have Harry Souttar back, maybe the change I'd make is we'd sign a centre-half who can start in January.
Absolutely. Johnny, one change you'd make looking back at the season?
It's tempting to go for a particular result, or in our case a missed penalty, which we've had a few of in big games, but I think...
Or two.
Well, yeah. God, don't remind, both in the exact same place in the goal. I was begging him, Wilson, just put it somewhere else, man. But I think the biggest moment for us actually was probably Romain Mundle's injury. Way back in, I think it was end of October, start of November, he picked up his injury. But whenever it was, the tweet the next day from the club was, okay, Romain Mundle picked up a hamstring injury, 6 to 8 weeks. But 6 to 8 weeks in Sunderland circles is now shorthand for 4 to 6 months. Like, it could be any amount of time. And I think he ended up missing neck end of 20 league games by the time he came back. And I think if we'd had him fit for that whole time and managed to get him and Enzo Lefebvre on the same pitch at the same time together much earlier, I think that automatic promotion race would have looked different. Whether it would have been enough for us to actually get into that top two, that's a big ask, when you have two teams finishing on 100 points. But I certainly think that would have made a huge difference to our season. And we probably wouldn't have gone in on 5 straight defeats if we had him fit the whole time.
Talking of Mundle and Lefebvre, Johnny, you've got our predicted 11 for the Championship playoff final, starting with the away team, Sunderland. This is how you think the Black Cats will line up, if you want to talk us through it.
Yeah, so the big question going into this playoff final from a Sunderland perspective is, are we going to line up with a 4-4-2 or are we going to go with a 4-3-3, 4-5-1, closer to the formation we've played the majority of the season? I think a lot of people will expect 4-4-2. Personally, I think it's going to be slightly more likely we go with the 3 across midfield. There's a couple of reasons for that. The primary reason is if Romain Mundle is fit, and obviously I've put him in my team, then I think he's got to start. We saw the impact he had in the second half of extra time in that second leg against Coventry. He's just a fantastic player and he gives us something so different on the left-hand side when he is fit. And it allows us to then move Enzo Lefebvre centrally, which I think obviously is going to get the best out of him. We saw when he got the assist for the first goal at the CBS, where did he play the pass from? The middle of midfield. The other kind of aspect to that is defensively. I think going up against Sheffield United, I think it's not unreasonable to suggest that we're going to be, sitting a little bit deeper, similar to what we did against Coventry. And I think if we try and play a 2 in the midfield, I think they're going to struggle to cover the ground that's necessary to kind of cut off those passing lanes, double up on the likes of Gus Harmer or, even Vinicius Souza when he's able to get on the ball in the midfield. If we allow him to dictate the tempo of the game by just spraying the ball around and playing those passes left and right, I think we're going to be in trouble. So I'd be expecting that 3. And then further forward, sorry, Gab,
No,
final,
go for it. No,
final
of course.
point. I think, the other question is going to be then who plays up front if we go back to one striker. For me, Eliza Mayenda, I think, offers you much more across a 90 or 120 minutes of a game. Isidore, in a lot of ways, is a bit like Haaland in the sort of the profile of striker being a goal scorer and nothing else. Wilson Isidore isn't going to be holding the ball up, beating people, laying people off and getting people involved. He's going to be trying to finish chances and that's it. I can see you smirking, Ollie. And
I just hope he is like Haaland in that he'll bottle taking pens at Wembley. You've got to go for these kind of things.
Wilson Isidore, please do not take a penalty at Wembley. We were all there against Burnley. Don't do it again. And then the final one, Patrick Roberts on the right. So that's what I think Lebris will go with. I think personally for me, I'd be tempted to play Mayenda on the right and Isidore through the middle. But I think he's going to go for Roberts for the amount of ground he covers and defensive work that he puts in across a game.
See, I can see the argument for starting Patrick Roberts as a way of nullifying Gus Harmer, who's obviously Sheffield United's best player on the left-hand side. But what I would try and do is have Mayenda very high up on the right of a front three in a 4-3-3, because if he runs at Jack Robinson, I think there's only one outcome. I think Mayenda gets the better of him, and then that's going to impact what Harrison Burrows can do, because Harrison Burrows is actually arguably key to Gus Harmer's threat because he's the one who offers the overlap. So if Harrison Burrows is staying deep and Harmer's cutting inside and doesn't really have the overlapping option, is Harmer going to be more limited? So I think you play Mayenda on the right of a front three, Harrison Burrows is going to stay deeper, and therefore you can get up the pitch and nullify Harmer.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of logic in that, and if that was the starting 11 we went with, I wouldn't have too many complaints. What would worry me though is in a big game at Wembley where I've been corrected during the week, the pitch is exactly the same size as the Stadium of Light, but massive. It feels massive. But when you're out there on the pitch at Wembley in a huge game, I think it can easily sap something out of the legs, and players start to feel it as the game goes on. If we've got Mayenda, Isidore and Mundle and Lafay all on the same pitch from the start, great combination, but who do you turn to then if things are going wrong? I think Tommy Watson, I don't think he's trusted enough just with the situation that obviously we know he's going to Brighton. He's not played a lot of football recently either. And then beyond that, you're looking at options. Yeah, we've got players who can come on. You'd have Patrick Roberts who could come on and, players like that. But in terms of the raw pace, Rig as well, yeah. But in terms of the raw pace and directness, those four, well, certainly the three of Mundle, Mayenda and Isidore would be able to give you. I think if you haven't got one of those to bring on, you're potentially hamstringing yourself late on in the game, which it's an interesting one to balance because it's how much do you want to try and win from the first whistle, I think. And I imagine Lebris is going to edge slightly on the more cautious side.
I think that's the advantage that Sheffield United have with Callum O'Hare, because he's made a big impact from the bench. You're getting excited at that, aren't you?
Loving it.
Big impact from the bench in both games against Bristol City.
Yeah, completely. And I think that strength in depth for United is absolutely huge. Thinking about the Sunderland team, though, there and that debate, I think the idea of Mayenda on that wing both excites me and terrifies me, I think, is where I land on that. Because obviously, you said there, let's get him running at Jack Robinson. And immediately, I almost ducked under the table for cover. I was like, I don't want to see that. Just help
That
me.
wouldn't have been hard on us.
Here we go. Yes, Gab, I'm not as tall as you.
Listen, we were all thinking it.
Is that it?
I'm going up. That's
Right.
No, but I think as well, obviously, there's the other side of that, which is Mayenda's defensive work, and whether or not, we talked about United's key threat coming down that left side potentially with Harmer inverting and Burrows on the overlap. Is Mayenda going to follow Burrows all the way back when he's trying to get up there, when he's trying to whip the balls in, when he's trying to create for United? So there's almost a trade-off there between both teams. Is putting Mayenda there, unlocking Harrison Burrows for United to attack, whilst also unlocking it completely for Mayenda to be able to get in behind. And I think that'd be a really aggressive move from Lebris. And I would be shocked if that was the decision you took to start a playoff final. I wouldn't be shocked to see it after an hour, maybe when you're starting to think about tired legs, getting sort of a little bit of a difference in there. But I think it'd be a huge shout from the start.
I think especially what we saw from him in the semi-final, I can't see him going particularly attacking at all. No. It makes me think that he might actually lean towards that 4-4-2, because Sunderland won the semi-final because of Mundle coming off the bench in extra time, Chris Rigg coming off the bench extra time. The depth and way you were able to move forward through the gears blew Coventry away almost, even though the goal came so late on. I just think you've got to think of this as potentially 120 minutes of football rather than get your best players on the pitch.
Yeah. Well, it's like I say, I think, again, I agree with a lot of what you just said, and I definitely expect Lebris to be cautious and defensive. I just think in terms of the shape, it's purely a question of getting Mundell in the team as a means to then unlock Enzo Lefebvre. For me, that's where it all kind of comes down to with this is, yes, the 4-4-2 worked, but it does limit Lefebvre. It means Mundell's not playing, and I think it just leaves us that little bit exposed in the middle. So I think it's a bit of a toss of a coin, really, because look, you can line up one way sort of as the game kicks off. You're going to be in different shapes and different positions when you're on the ball, off the ball, transitions and different phases of the game. I just think, Lebris having that element of caution in him, I think it's going to manifest itself in that midfield three this time. I think the 4-4-2 was very purpose-driven against Coventry. But again, like I say, don't be shocked to see it again because it has done the job and got us here. So
that flexibility will be interesting to see. Ollie, time to turn to you and your predicted 11 Sheffield United for the playoff final. Who have you got down?
Yeah, it's another interesting one because obviously we had a similar debate about what formation are we going to see United utilising there. We could again go to the three in midfield, that sort of a bit more structured 4-2-3-1, or we could do what we've done for the semi-finals and that we saw towards the end of the season there, which was this almost 4-2-2-2. And it's obviously really interesting how that plays. I think we will stick with that. I think it worked so well in the semi-final. It's our best attacking performances of the season. In the regular season, we only scored 3 twice. All of a sudden, we've done it 2 in 2 games, utilising this system. So I definitely expect us to keep with that. I think the key role for me in this one is who's going to play out on the right wing. That feels like the debate. I think every other position, you can almost lock in 10 positions. I think it's no debate. That's United's best 11. But the right wing is really interesting because we've got so many options that can play there. We've used obviously Ben Brereton Diaz, Jez Rak-Sake. I've gone for Ryan Brewster. He played in the first leg against Bristol City and I thought he was excellent actually. I really felt as though a lot of the good United did, particularly actually when it was 11v11 and we actually had space to get in behind. They had a fullback who was trying to get forward. They wanted to come onto us. He had so much time, so much space. Arguably our most dangerous player. So I think he will get the nod. I think as well, there's a little bit of that. It's just in the back of your mind it goes, you've talked a long time about he needs a moment. He needs those moments to make himself a United legend. Well, he got one at Hillsborough. If he gets a second at Wembley, every single penny is paid back and then some. So, that's where I'm leaning towards. I think Kiefer Moore is another one who's going to be a really key player. And I think he's going to be a key battle, actually. I looked at your 11 and I saw Dan Ballard and I thought, Kiefer Moore against Dan Ballard, that is two behemoths absolutely going after it. But, the more I think about it, Moore's in control of that situation. Ballard can't come roaming out of his position. He can't just chase Kiefer Moore around the pitch. And if Kiefer Moore says, I'm just going to go and stand on Luke O'Nien, and wherever Luke O'Nien goes, I'm going to stand next to him and I'm going to beat him for every header. That's where I'm winning the flick-ons. Tyrese Campbell's pace is going to be against Dan Ballard. There's a real... United have got to be really intelligent with how we use that. But if we can get that to work, we've got Brewster pushed high on the right, you've got Moore winning his headers against hopefully Luke O'Nien, and you've got Campbell's pace through the middle. There's a lot of ways that we can hurt you there. And I think that is probably where this game will lie for United and how we can potentially get on top of Sunderland and win the game.
That right wing spot, Ollie, I think it comes down to whether Jezran Rak-Sake is fully fit. Because I think if he's fully fit, I think you play your best player there. Ryan Brewster's had some great moments, brilliant goal at Hillsborough, brilliant performance in the semi-final, but ultimately is he as good a right winger as Jezran Rak-Sake? I don't think he is. And I think in terms of quality, it's one thing having Kiefer Moore there, but you want to talk about quality of deliveries. You're having Hamza Chowdhury at right back. He's not going to give you quality delivery, so from the right-hand side, you need to have somebody there who can come up with the right deliveries and the right service, and I think that player is Jezran Rak-Sake.
I certainly see it. I think one of the difficulties we've had with Rak-Sake so far this season is he's left-footed. And so whenever he plays down the right wing, he tries to go down, and every single time he gets to the edge of the box, he's got to come back inside. Yeah. It's predictable. Defenders know exactly where he's going, and so usually he's getting crowded out. He's not able to get that delivery, put the ball in the box. Feels almost like if we wanted Rak-Sake as a pure winger to really look at getting the crosses in, he'd need to be on the left, which is controversially where we play Gustavo Harmer, and I can only apologise to you for that.
You could if you were going really direct. It wouldn't happen for the playoff final. We haven't seen it. You could just swap them.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. It'd be fun.
It's never going to happen.
It's not going to happen, but that'd be a lot of fun. And so whereas I think Brewster being right-footed, he gives us a little bit more flexibility. He can go inside or outside. He's less predictable because I'm not sure he knows what his feet are going to do, so how can a defender? And so it's a really interesting one. Rak-Sake feels more natural, feels like the better choice, feels like the better player. But actually, with the way that he's limited in this structure of always having to come on his left foot, he maybe doesn't quite have the flexibility we need to get a proper winger down there.
I'm Occam's razor, Ollie. Jez from Rak-Sake's the better player.
I think it's really interesting, isn't it, that this game, I think the two weak areas that we're looking at for either side is the opposite wings. You know, I'm looking at that right-hand side in your predicted 11, I'm thinking, if Romain Mundle's on the pitch, Dennis Serkin behind him, like, we can get at that and we can cause some serious problems. I don't see necessarily the discipline between a pair in there to be able to shift up and down at the right times and cover each other for a full game. But then at the same time, obviously, you look at the other side of the pitch, and I see Burrows and Armour, and I think, oh, that could be a long old afternoon for Trey here if things don't go our way. So I just think it makes for a really, really interesting game, rather than, I think sometimes if you see two teams where everything wants to go through the middle, you can see a lot of cancelling each other out and nullifying stuff. I think this is going to make for I think it's going to be cagey, but I still think it's going to make for an interesting game for the neutral, because it's such a almost lopsided kind of affair in that sense, which I think, could lead to some potentially chaotic moments.
Anybody who loves a long diag is going to be absolutely in their element for this one.
Luke O'Nien is going to have about 55 attempted long passes this game.
And Jack Robinson's going to launch it into that stand so often.
Bringing Brexit football back.
That's what you've got to do.
Two teams, 4-4-2. None of this Premier League nonsense. You're going to see the best of the Championship here. Gab, if you could run through your predicted 11s quickly, please, starting with Sunderland, if you would.
My predicted 11, I might have to twist to see it, I've gone with Patterson in goal, Trey Hume at right back with Dan Ballard and Luke O'Nien in centre half, Dennis Serkin at left back. I would, like Johnny, I would go for a midfield three of Enzo Lefebvre, Dan Neil and Joe Bellingham. Then I'd have a front three of Elisa Mayenda, Wilson Isidore and Romain Mundle.
Very attacking indeed. And your Sheffield United 11 as well, if you have that with you. We could pop
Sheffield United 11
as well,
if we can get that one up.
I mean, you can start with the goalkeeper. I think we know that.
Yeah, Michael Cooper.
You don't want Adam Davis?
What have I got against Saturday? Michael Cooper, obviously. I think Hamza Chowdhury. Oh, there we go. Hamza Chowdhury, Anel Ahmedovich, Jack Robinson, Harrison Burrows, Sidney Peck with Vinny Souza in midfield, Jezden Rak-Sake and Gus Harmer. With a front two of Kiefer Moore and Tyrese Campbell. I think Campbell's got to start for me.
Yeah.
I think his movement and ability can pull defence apart. I think he's got to start.
Yeah, I think as we've seen a front two as well, we've tried Moore and Campbell, we've tried Moore and Cannon. I thought Moore and Cannon was effective against Burnley, but the movement just isn't there. Against second leg against Bristol City, that first sort of 45 minutes when they did really try and come and play, we were struggling so much to get out, mainly because Kiefer Moore won every single header and Cannon was often running that opposite direction. Just where's the ball going to be? I'll go that way.
When you got FIFA and you don't know the control.
Yeah. You've dropped the control and it's just the gear stick's stuck going that way. Where's he going? And so I think it's got to be that front two, because their partnership has looked really exciting, caused so many problems. It's interesting against Bristol City, of course, that the way that we got the red card and the penalty was Tyrese Campbell dropping in, winning the big flick on, and Kiefer Moore sprinting through. So, who knows which way it's going to go. Maybe Campbell's going to pull onto 09 and go for the big headers.
So I've got a question to you. I'm curious to ask, because we know the central midfield to some extent. We know that Dan Neil and Joe Bellingham are going to start for Sunderland, whether it's with Lefebvre or not. And we know that Vinny Souza and Sidney Peck are going to start for Sheffield United. Would either of you trade your current two starting central midfielders for the other?
I wouldn't trade the two.
I think we'd both trade one.
I'd be tempted to trade one. I think, because I think the problem we have when we play that two in midfield with Neil and Job is, look, Neil's played that kind of holding role, the sixth position, a lot this season. Job's played it a couple of times. Neither of them are proper out-and-out defensive midfielders.
Although Dan Neil's come on a lot in that regard.
He has. He's come on leaps and bounds this season, but he's just not. It's not his natural it's not in his DNA as a footballer to do that. Whereas I think Vinny Souza, he's got that in spades. Certainly at the Championship level. I mean, you can quibble about what happened or didn't happen in the Premier League, but I think certainly at this level, I'd be looking at Vinny Souza alongside Enzo Lefebvre. My mouth would start watering at the prospect of that.
Yeah,
I'm not. No offence, I'm not taking Peck. Sorry.
Well, you see, it's interesting because obviously I agree. I think Vinny Souza and depending on who's we're talking about in that too, whether it's Bellingham, whether it's Lefay, I think there's a really exciting partnership that you could build there between the two squads. But I do think we're sleeping on Sidney Peck. This is his first senior career. Wasn't supposed to be anywhere near United's starting 11 this season. He was supposed to be out on loan at Rotherham in League One. He's come in because of injury to Ollie Arblaster and has fit this team better than anybody. I would argue that in terms of our midfield, he's the linchpin. He's the one who's been there most consistently all season. And in our most difficult moments, he was the senior central midfielder. He was bringing in, when Tom Davies is struggling for fitness, it's Sidney Peck doing his running, making sure that he's okay. He's partnered Harrison Burrows. He's partnered everybody that we could possibly play in the position. And so I think Sidney Peck is going to have an unbelievable career. I think he's a fantastic footballer. But at this level, for a game like this, just a one-off, I think I'd be tempted to see if Lefay fancied it, or even if Bellingham fancied it, for that sort of extra physicality that he brings and that sort of way of just getting up and down. He's a lovely footballer.
I think if we look at Lebris's tactics in the semi-final and how he's going to approach this final, I know we've touched on it a little bit. I was massively disappointed in what Sunderland did in that second leg in terms of trying to hold on. Shut up. In terms of, I think, again, and we saw it in the same light earlier in the season, I think you kind of gave us too much of the ball. You gave Cov too much impetus when I think if you'd have just come out and attacked us like you did in extra time, it would have been a draw or Sunderland win in 90 minutes.
Yeah.
Are you slightly concerned that this kind of conservative manager... I'm torn on this one because I look at it and I think, what's the best way to win the playoffs? It probably is being resolute, defensively solid, time wasting, doing all of that nonsense that can get you over the line. But I don't think it gets the best out of what Sunderland have got. And if you lose, I know that's what will be said about it.
So there's two things that you've correctly identified there. One is I'm on the fence as well because, like you say, probably playing the odds and the numbers, it probably is the best way to try and win a playoff final is to be defensively solid first and foremost, then look to get further up the pitch. But it also absolutely is not the way that's going to get the most out of this group of players. We would see a better performance from Sunderland. And we would have seen a better performance at the Stadium of Light in the second leg if we had gone out there and tried to attack, kind of that first maybe 15 to 20 minute opening period especially, which is what we were doing to a lot of teams early in the season as well when we had that start where we won 9 in 12. That was built on progressive kind of getting up the pitch, very much front foot football.
The conservatism actually came later. It was more starting really strongly.
That more conservative, sitting a bit deeper approach started to come in when we were losing Mundell, when Job then had a suspension and he missed 3 games, and we then had to adapt a little bit. But also, like you say, if you go for if you try from minute 1 in this game to try and go and attack and win, and you concede early, you're left looking very silly with egg on your face and a massive, mountain to climb at that point. I think we'll start as defensively as we did against Coventry. I don't think it'll take as long for us to come out of our shell. I think we were very much banking on in the semi-finals. We took that lead, the 1-goal lead from the first leg, and I think we were just resolute in, we're not going to concede more than 1 goal. No matter what happens, we're not conceding 2 goals. We're not getting knocked out of this without a penalty shootout at worst. Whereas I don't think that mentality is going to cut it this time. I think we definitely have to be a bit more positive. But I also, like I say, I do expect us to do that as well. With Mundell being fitter, he certainly wouldn't have to wait until the second half of extra time to get minutes in the final. So I think naturally we are going to be a bit more forward thinking, but I wouldn't be expecting us to come out and start seeing 5 and 6 men getting in the Sheffield United box in the first 20 minutes. If you're expecting that, I think you're going to be disappointed.
It's going to be 0-0 at half time, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be very, very tight, I think, as well. It's just the very fine margins, isn't it? Don't know how many times I need to watch that header back, but if that goes in,
stop torturing yourself,
the whole narrative about how Sunderland did and how they approached the second leg changes. What would you rather Sunderland did in the final? Would you rather they did this compact, narrow shape, which is really hard to break out? Because Sheffield United were probably on the receiving end of a decent Sunderland performance earlier in the season where they did attack a little bit more.
Yeah, it's a really horrible predicament, to be honest, in trying to figure out what you'd rather play against between the two, because I think what really worked for us against Bristol City was them coming to play. They, in the first leg, picked a really attacking 11 because they clearly thought that the only way they were going to come out of this with a positive result was to win at Ashton Gate and then try and defend it. So when Bristol City came out to play, we could pick them off, we could bypass the midfield, we could use the long balls to Kiefer Moore. I think that really, really helped us. If Sunderland are going to sit deep, well, you can't do long ball and flick on against a defence that's already packed back on the edge of the box. You know what I mean? You're not able to build up in those same ways. However, the opposite side of that is, okay, we can't go long to Kiefer Moore, but how much time and space is Gustavo Harmer going to get on the left wing to sort of just take his time on the ball, pick his pass, start to help us build up through those special players rather than having to rely on the quick transition. So it's a really interesting dynamic. I think the bit that worries me most, and thinking about these two options here, the midfield three doesn't worry me that much. I think, there's some really talented, really fantastic players in there. And Lefay, we saw in that second half of extra time how impactful he can be, getting the ball into feet, back to goal. I joked with Johnny before about how it was almost like he had three men around him, then suddenly the ball was at his feet and he was in 10 yards of space. And you couldn't quite, I was like, where's this? He was marked. How's he got space? And so obviously there's things to worry about there. But actually I think United would rather play against that than play against long ball to Isidore and Mayenda over the top. Because those two running beyond Jack Robinson and Anel, that's where we will get hurt in this game. And so them sitting back nullifies Kiefer Moore. It means that we can't quite do the same with the runners onto the ball, and it gives them so much space to create for Mayenda and Isidore that almost I'd rather see them come and play, because I think that plays into what we want. I don't think we want 70% of possession. I think we want 40, but 40 that's going to hurt you.
Yeah, we won 40 as well, so it is going to be a game of two teams going, please take the ball back, please.
Ref, will you just hold on to it for 20 minutes and then we'll figure it out?
And sorry, Gab, just a tiny point before you come in, please. As well. I think you're absolutely spot on, Ollie, about the fact that you as a team would rather play against the three than have the two up front, because whereas the three for us gives a bit more stability and it means that we're a bit calmer defensively. If you've got the two up front, there's always a risk, isn't there? Any transition, any turnover can turn into a one-on-one like that, and it'd be the same if you play the two up front with the two wide players. Then all of a sudden, for us, it's like right. At any given time, we could lose the ball and have a 4-on-4 or a 4-on-3 going the wrong way. So it is very risk reward, isn't it?
Yeah. But I think Sunderland can have the best of both worlds with a 4-3-3 if the front three are pinned high up the pitch. Because that limits how much Sheffield United can attack, because you've got three massive counter-attacking outlets and Enzo Lefay feeding them in.
And that's where we come back to the Burrows dilemma, isn't it? That we were talking about before. If Burrows gets up the pitch, it changes.
Absolutely. But I think for Sunderland, that's where conservatism meets adventure for me. I think that's the best way for them to play it.
When conservatism meets adventure,
lovely.
You should work for like Centre Parks or something like that.
Unbelievable.
That
is absolutely beautiful. I think final point really on the tactical side of it, Johnny, how do Sunderland go about stopping Harmer, whatever you want to call him?
We go about stopping the centre mid who gets shunted out on the wing I think, look, first and foremost, Trey Hume's got to be disciplined, extremely disciplined throughout this game. He's done really well going forward this season. He's contributed a good number of goals and assists. But I think he has to be absolutely on it in terms of positioning, recognising the opportunities to get forward and recognising the danger early and being able to sit back. I also think it's going to be massively on whoever does end up playing in that right wing slot or right centre mid if it's a three or whatever, whoever's on the right hand side, they've also got to be able to work in tandem with Hume. And like you said, I mean, we've kind of done it to death a bit now, but pin Harrison Burrows back when you get the chance, but don't overcommit, don't be going too far. So I think it's all going to be about sort of positional intelligence and game management for us. I think one-on-ones, I think Hume's up there with anybody in this league in terms of defensively being able to win those duels and those battles. Not to say he can't get beaten.
Gustavo Harmer.
He can get beaten. Anyone can get beaten in a one-on-one, but I'd back him more often than not to be able to deal with that. But it's about limiting the number of times that you're in that situation, because as you say, Ollie, any one of those could be the one he gets wrong and Harmer's past him and then it's in the box and it's in the net.
Or it could be Harmer floating inside and Campbell making a run onto the outside. It could happen that way.
I think that's the issue, isn't it? It's not a one-on-one battle with Harmer. It's more than that. It's almost up to the midfielders as much as it is the right
follows Gustavo Harmer.
Which is why the positioning's got to be absolutely spot on, because whoever's job it is to then cover the space, cover the runner, be the spare man, they've got to know when to go, and they've got to be absolutely at it for the full game, because if we have a lapse in concentration, then you'll punish us.
I think Dan Neil's going to play a big part in nullifying Harmer as well.
Yes.
I think that could be a little bit of not a direct battle, but I think that's going to have a big say as well.
We'll come on to the score predictions in a little bit for this massive game. I wanted to throw it forward a little bit though. Ollie, what's your biggest fears if Sheffield United don't win this game of football?
Look, if we don't win this game of football, it's another season in the Championship. Fine, okay. There's no VAR.
You're back on this podcast.
No VAR, and I get to do the pod. What more could I want? In fact, there's no downsides to losing this game of football. But I think, seriously, for the club, it's one at Lampard. But seriously, though, for the club, it's all about, we're going to lose so many players if we don't get promoted. Gustavo Harmer, we've talked about him there, how exciting he is. Championship Player of the Year. He's not playing another season in the Championship. Vinicius Souza is not playing another season in the Championship, and now Ahmedodzic is not playing another season in the Championship, and suddenly the spine of our Michael Cooper may not be playing another season in the Championship, and that's the spine of the team. Everything that we've been good at, that we've built through this season, almost gets picked apart one by one, and so there's a complete squad rebuild to take place in the summer, and you're doing that at risk. It becomes one shot. You've got one more shot at it. You've lost your parachute payments.
Well, it's that singing.
I know. Bit of JLS.
Make it count.
I was thinking Eminem. We're on very different vibes here.
That's fine. You've got one guy who's cool and the JLS fans.
Yeah, we've outed ourselves massively there.
I know, yeah.
I'm proud of it. I'll watch JLS forever.
My heart will beat again.
So Aston Marigold, how do you think
that's a height joke again.
I wish you could do a backflip like he could.
I wish I could do a backflip like he could. Obviously, I wish Vinny Souza could as well, for anybody who was watching the celebration against Bristol City after Brooks had scored. But yeah, so I think it's the rebuild. And like I referenced before, you run out of parachute payments, and then all of a sudden it's on this new ownership. How much are they putting in to get us back into the Premier League? And how much were they relying on a quick response? How much were they relying on parachute money and that being used to fund and build the club? Because we've had a long time now in this purgatory. I think it's, this will be our third promotion in 6 years to the Premier League. We've got to at some point make it stick, and so having a year out, losing that money, not being ready to go back again, it feels like it's quite an important one, whereas if we get this wrong, there's only, like I say, one last opportunity, and if you miss it, do we fall back into just Championship full-time purgatory?
It doesn't feel that, and I think it's probably the fact, as you touched on earlier, you're not a parachute club, but it doesn't feel quite that big for Sunderland in terms of, yes, you'll probably lose Joe Bellingham, potentially Chris Rigg, but you're still in a very, very good place. Out of the rest of the teams, Gab, that we've discussed without parachute payments in the Championship, Sunderland are bang up the top of there.
Yeah, and I think as well, when you touch on the transfers, we're probably going to lose. Well, I think it's almost certain we'll lose Joe Bellingham regardless. Even if we're in the Premier League next season, I think he'll be going to a much bigger club, or certainly a much higher level of club. All right, hang on, let's take this outside. We'll have a 5-minute break, lads. Definitely not them unwashed lot up the road. But look, I think he's gone either way to a European club, aside playing European football. I think so. We're not as desperate to go up to keep people, because I think we've accepted that whether we go up or not, that's going to be happening. There's going to be some, not upheaval, but there's going to be some turnover this summer. There's going to be some positions that we need to look at moving some people on who've maybe struggled with injuries. I'm thinking of Niall Huggins, Adji Elise, these kind of players who, at Championship level, if they weren't injured, would be very good squad players. But then if you go up, you're looking at maybe not good enough. Even if we stay down, are you available enough? So whether we're up there, whether we're still down here, we're going to need to have a bit of a busy summer, certainly. It might not necessarily need to be 15 plus people coming in, but there's going to be change. I think for us, it's much more a question of trying to ensure that the key people in the positions at the club are still there. So I'm thinking, I would like to see Labrie still as manager regardless, whatever happens in the playoff final. I want to see Christian Speakman still there. I want to see the recruitment team still in place.
I think he's actually been a little bit underappreciated, Christian Speakman.
Massively underappreciated.
The work that he's done.
Oh, I mean, this will get us crucified on Twitter because Christian Speakman splits opinion, but the work he's done in taking us from where we were in League One when he came in to one game from the Premier League now on a comparative shoestring is incredible. And because of that, I have faith whether we're in the Championship this time in August or whether we're in the Premier League, we will be fine. You know, when like you say, Ollie, you know, you're looking at it as maybe a bit of a last chance saloon with the parachute money next year. We don't have that same constraint. I just think for us, it's, you know, we're on a journey at the moment. Everything's trending generally in the right direction. It's just a question of when that final step comes. If it's this season, fantastic, and you know, I'll be loving it at Wembley on Saturday, and I'll be going mental if we win, and I won't be thinking, oh, that's probably only 18 points next season or whatever.
18? You're feeling positive.
Yeah, no, I was optimistic. Well, I'll have had 10 pints by head, so always drink responsibly. But no, I mean, seriously, I think, you know, we're in a nice position where we can afford to go for it, but if we fail, then, you know, it's fine and we can go again. I wouldn't be too worried about us next season. I think, you know, we are in a nice position. It's all basically good. What it's going to determine for Sunderland isn't the overall future of the club. It's going to determine the timelines of everything. Yeah. How soon can we get back? How soon can we look at trying to up those transfer fees again and bring in the next wave of talent and the next? So yeah, it's all just about determining, you know, where we are in 5 years' time. It starts on Saturday.
You agree with that, Gab?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also say that for some of these players, especially in the scenario that Sunderland do win at Wembley, that I would actually say maybe stay at Sunderland another year to just continue that development and maybe go the year after. Because I think I see a lot of young players who, when they show a lot of talent, they think, right, let's grab the next offer. But sometimes that can end up setting you further back than if you actually bet on, let's make the next sort of season work for me and where's the best place. And I think Sunderland have proved themselves a fantastic place to develop players, and I think that should be a source of real pride for everyone connected, regardless of the outcome on Saturday.
And like you say, you just look at somebody like Jack Clark, who obviously got his Premier League move last summer, and fair play to him, I'm sure he's earning a lot more money, and I'm sure, you know, he's at a Premier League outfit and all the rest of it, but we could very well be crossing them in the other direction in a week's time, or less than a week's time. So how much better off are you, really? You know, he could be on Premier League wages with Sunderland come July. Yeah. And we've got a couple of players in similar boats. We've got Dan Neil and Dennis Serkin, who are both entering the last year of their contract. So I think you're right, Gab. You know, what league we're in is going to determine the future of some very specific players in a binary sense. I think if we don't go up, you're looking at Neil, you're looking at Serkin, you're thinking, are you going to sign another long contract on Championship money when you could go to a Premier League team? Yeah. Possibly not. So in that sense, it's got an immediate impact, but I think you're right as well to point out that I think as time goes by, I think Sunderland becomes a more and more attractive destination for these young players. And, you know, look, part of that is showing that we're willing to let people move on to bigger and better things when they come along, which, you know, we've got to learn to take the rough with the smooth on that, but I
think the only worry with that, of course, is obviously for anybody staying down in the Championship is what happens next season when the very, very big expensive hitters from League One come up and they spend and offer the wages that would dwarf what Sunderland are willing to offer. You know, some of the rumours that you've seen so far about bids, and obviously it's paper talk, so let's not get too dragged in it, but the wages that Birmingham are currently paying to certain players are comparative to what we pay, never mind what teams without parachute money pay. So you've got teams coming up with so much funding and backing that's the concern for me. It's not so much Sunderland are on a fantastic continual upward trajectory, but suddenly next season you have 3 parachute payments, but you effectively have 5 parachute teams in it with the money that the teams coming up from League One are going to spend. Yep. And so all of a sudden that top of the Championship is getting more and more crowded, and for clubs who are doing it right, who are looking after themselves, who are developing talent, who are starting to sort of really get the right trading model going, that becomes a much bigger margin for error when everybody in the Championship is spending the money that some of these teams from League One are.
It's all about the opportunity, isn't it?
Yeah.
The opportunity has come now for both Sheffield United and Sunderland. You've got to this stage, it's about grabbing it, because as you say, next season we're talking about a whole different ball game in terms of wages and stuff. Right, we've come to the big moment. We are going to do a combined 11, by the way, in a minute. But we're coming to our score predictions for the Championship playoff final. And Gab, I think I'm going to come to you first.
I think it's going to be goalless after 90 minutes. And I think Elisa Mienda's going to score the winner in extra time.
thought
Do
we
you
were
know,
friends.
I think something very, 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 very similar. I think Sunderland will win 1-0 one way or another. I'd look at what they did in the semi-final. I look at how they finished the season. I look at the players they can bring off the bench. And I just think Ollie's playoff pain might continue a bit. I think this is a real great moment for Sunderland to go and win this game. So I'm also going for a 1-0 Sunderland win.
I'll give you both your £10 after the show, right?
Ollie, surely.
I mean, come on. We won 92 points this season. We were miles clear of, and I know Sunderland would have been a lot closer to us if they'd not just decided to sack it off towards the end of the season, which, full respect, to be fair.
This is the biggest points gap between two teams in a championship playoff final ever.
So the
14
biggest points gap. The biggest points gap in a championship playoff final ever. That's how much better we are. We've just broke the record for the biggest championship semi-final playoff win of all time. Let's forget the Wembley curse, the playoff curse. We have proven over 48 games so far that the only two teams in this division that were better than us are Leeds and Burnley, and that's because they're two of the best championship teams of all time based on the points record, based on how they've done. We are, for the first time that I can remember, not just going to Wembley as a team who, it's going to be, it's going to be a great game, it's desperate, we've got to try and do this. We're going there with something to win, something to prove. We're going there because we're the best team by far. I think we win this. I do. I think we win it in 90 minutes. I think we win it 2-1. I think the fact that we have got such unbelievable one-on-one talent, the fact that we have proved over the season that we are just a lot better at the moment. We're still talking about a Sunderland team who've won 1 of the last 8. We're not talking about a Sunderland team that are firing and flying. You've had a great playoff moment, but even your fantastic playoff moment were only an equaliser. Yeah, it was only an equaliser. So we're talking about a team here where United, the form, the players, the season, everything tells me that we are, if I can just get rid of the doubt and the sort of cursed feelings that it never goes right for us at Wembley, that it never goes right for us in the playoffs, just look at this with my head at what these two teams have done. We are the better team for this game. That doesn't mean you win. Doesn't mean you always win. There's every chance that somebody comes and on the day they play better than you do. And if you do, fair play to you, because you'll have earned it. You've had a fantastic season. But we've got to go into this. We are the favourites for a reason. And it's because over the season, we have proved ourselves the better team.
I love that.
That is brilliant fight.
Brilliant fight. I just don't like some of the individual matchups from a Sheffield United perspective, but we've been into that enough. Johnny, what do you reckon?
Well, you're actually all witnessing the nerves begin to kick in real time for me here, because it's all now we're discussing the actual score and the predictions. I'm thinking, oh God, here we go. I think it's going to be a ridiculously tight game. Yeah. And look, I think Ollie's made some valid points there about, they have got a lot more points than us. We haven't been on the best run of form.
None of that matters. None of that matters.
Exactly. None of that matters. And if you ever call Dan Ballard's goal an equaliser to my face ever again, we're going to have some serious problems.
Came off his neck, didn't it?
A misheaded equaliser in the last minute. Well done.
I expect this kind of talk from Simon, all right? I can forgive that. Yeah, we've all been there. You should know better.
I do know better. Yeah, I regret it already.
No, but in all seriousness, look, I think it's going to be a really, really tight game. I think it's going to be a case of who wants it more feels too cliched to kind of fall back on that. But I think it's going to be down to who manages to get the intensity levels right, as in not just who's more intense, but who picks the right moments to go and try and get the goal and try and go for the jugular, and vice versa. Who recognises, right, it's time to sit in, it's time to just play the occasion for 5 minutes and just let's get through it. I think that we've got that in us. I do think we've got that level of game management that I think we've built up through the course of the season. Yes, the points total's not ideal, but I think we have shown that we're capable of playing these different styles and adapting to things on the fly. Certainly Labrise has got that kind of in his locker. And so I think it's going to go to extra time. I think it's going to be 1-1 at full time of normal time. I think it's going to go to extra time. And I think we're going to nick it and we're going to do it 2-1. And whether it's 2-1 or 1-0, if we get an an extra time winner from Eliza Mayenda, Garb, you can have the keys of Sunderland, mate. You can have the freedom of the city.
Where does Dan Ballard want his statue if he scores the winner?
Well, he can have it in my back garden if he wants me. Wherever you fancy it, Dan, son.
Well, I'm really glad you both...
flirtatious there.
I'm really glad you've backed both of your teams to win the playoff final. The final thing we're going to do quickly is put together Sheffield United and Sunderland combined 11. We obviously did it for the semi-finals. Now we're going to do it 1-on-1. I don't think there's any real debate at all about the goalkeeper or the right back, Gab, right?
No, I think Michael Cooper starts in goal, and I think Trey Hume starts at right back.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
Should we go to the centre backs then? And Ollie, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so I obviously looked at this, trying to figure out, because I think it's United's weakest position at the moment. I think it's obviously where we're most vulnerable is at centre half. I think we've got one who is really good if he's got the right partner next to him, and I think actually in this team he will have 100% the right partner next to him. I've gone a Nell next to Dan Ballard. I think they would make a fantastic partnership. I think they would complement each other perfectly, and I think individually they're probably the two best defenders that we're talking about sort of that are available for this team.
Agreed.
So I don't disagree with a lot of what you said, but I've took a slightly different tack. I've gone Chris Mepham and Harry Souttar. And before you say it, I know Souttar's been injured for half the season. Before you say it, but I think when he was fit and when he was playing, I think he made you a much better side defensively. Yeah. And I think if you'd had him for the full season, it could potentially be a very different picture in the autos. And I've gone with Mepham over Ballard. Look, obviously I love Dan Ballard. He's absolutely brilliant. Big Dan, the man. But I just don't think he's played enough this season to justify it, whereas I think Mepham has more often not been preferred to him alongside Luke O'Nien in our back four. So
and just to add to that, although I would agree with maybe not Luke O'Nien just missing out, I think as a person, I think he's an extremely influential person behind what Sunderland have been able to do.
He can be the captain of the team.
Yeah, exactly. If you're building a squad, you take O'Nien in the squad all day long without hesitation. But just in terms of individual quality, I don't think he's quite at the same level as a Mepham or a Ballard or even Ahmed Hodzic and Souttar. I think just because they're natural centre backs, I think O'Nien has that count against him.
But he is a mentality.
Who are we going for then, Gab? An L plus one of the Sunderland
I think an L and Ballard. I think Ollie's got it.
There you go. We have to give Ballard it for that semi-final moment, don't we? That does.
For that equaliser.
No complaints from me.
That net equaliser he scored. Apparently that gets them in the team. This is a good one, isn't it? Harrison Burrows, Dennis Serkin. Gab, who would you fall in favour of?
Just Burrows, but quite even. But I would say just about Burrows. Certainly for a second half of the season, I think he's been excellent.
Make the case, Johnny, for Serkin?
Yeah, look, I think Serkin's first half of the season, until he picked up his injury, I think he was the best left back in the division, and I think it wasn't even that close, to be honest. I think he was pretty comfortably, even if you looked at the stats, he was top of nearly every metric. I will admit though, the injury that he's picked up then kind of derailed the second half of his season. He's not had the consistent runs of football enough to really get him in the team. Obviously, I've picked him because I've got to back the lads. But fair enough plumping for Burrows.
We'll go Burrows, and I think you've both got, unsurprisingly, Vinny Sousa and Joe Bellingham. Yep. We did a discussion on them earlier, so I don't think we need to go into that too far. I also think there's a bit of a formation change here. Yeah. You've got Enzo Lafay in midfield, and you don't have him in your team.
Nope.
Look, need I just refer you to 10 chances created, 2 assists, 24 kilometres covered over 2 games in the playoff semis, while playing out of position in a low block? How can you leave out a player who's good enough to do that?
Because he's had 2 good games since January.
They were 2 bloody good games, though. Hey, he tortured Luke Ayling at the Riverside as well against Borough. Okay, give him his credit. No, but I mean, formation differences account for it, don't they?
100%. If we were playing 3 midfield, Enzo Lafay would have been my other player stepping in there. As much as we joke, obviously a fantastic footballer, brilliant in the way that he can impact games, been massively affected by his injury, by playing out of position. So that's the difference that really affects it.
And he's hurt by the fact that Hamer goes over to the left instead of going over to the right. You could easily be sat here going Lafay on the left, Hamer on the right, happy days, end of story. But obviously 2 into 1 doesn't go. So
yeah, and I think if we were picking them against each other, it's got to be Gustavo Hamer that gets the nod there, the Championship Player of the Season. But I think you've got him in on your left wing anyway. I've just got 2 up front, which is where the switch comes through.
Let's go for a 4-4-2 because I think that's the most effective formation for both of these teams and putting them together. Gus Hamer on the right doesn't need much explanation. Right wing, Johnny, who have you got?
Well, I'd fitted Mundell in the right wing to allow Hamer to play on the left.
Very generous of you.
Well, I'm a nice guy like that, But see, I find right wing the trickiest position. Yeah. Whether it's a 4 or a 3, I think neither of us have had somebody who's been outstanding in that position this season. It feels a little bit harsh to Patrick Roberts for me not to put him in because he's flattered to deceive at times, but I think you look at his assist numbers, he is actually up there in kind of the top 10, I think, of the assist numbers.
I think it's because he doesn't, he's not got maybe that direct pace that maybe a Mundle has, where you look at him visually and think, wow, but he does actually produce quality as well as that work ethic.
Yeah, and a lot of his stuff that he does, like you say, is his work ethic and his defensive output, which isn't going to catch headlines as a right winger. So I've gone Mundle, but I think it's very much of a muchness whoever we pick on this
got
right.
Mundle on the right.
Well, I would put Mundle on the right. I think there's nobody else who's standing out. I went Mayenda because I've not got him in my front two, and so I thought the best way to try and balance that out to make sure they're in is I've got Mayenda playing down the right. But I do think positionally, if we're happy to say that Mundle can go on the right, I'm more than happy with that, because I think Mundle's a fantastic player, and obviously everything that Sunderland did so well at the start of the season, he was a massive standout.
Let's do that. And Gab, I think I might leave it to you to decide the front two in this team. I think Ollie's got Isidore and Campbell.
If I'm picking two, I'll go Mayenda and Campbell.
Isidore and Campbell versus Mayenda and Campbell. I think Campbell's been brilliant in the second half of the season, and I think he's actually been quite underrated in terms of his impact on Sheffield United's chance creation and all that kind of thing. So I will go with Campbell, and I will go with Mayenda.
Yes!
Just about.
I mean, he's in my team.
There was always going to be one Sunderland striker.
Kiefer Moore completely overlooked here.
It's not been his best season, to be fair.
Or Tom Cannon.
Or less said.
The last thing we need to do before we wrap up this show is decide who's managing this team. Is it Chris Wilder? Is it Regis Labrise?
It's Chris Wilder.
It's Regis Labrise, mate.
It's not, it's Chris Wilder.
Labrise has never threatened an official for eating a sandwich. He has to be in this team.
Exactly. He's never threatened an official for eating a sandwich. Why would you have him as your manager?
Gab, you've got to decide.
I think any manager worth their salt will threaten an official for it.
Yes, Gab.
Yeah.
So we're going
I'll
for
go
Chris
Wilder. Yeah,
we're going
Wilder.
Chris Wilder. Brilliant stuff. Make sure you like and subscribe to the show. Get in your thoughts in the comments down below who you think is going to win the Championship Playoff Final. And next week we've got the final episode of the season of the Sportsman Untitled with me, Conor McGilligan, and Gab Sutton. But guys, I wish you both the very, very best of luck at Wembley on Saturday. It's going to be very, very tense indeed. But that's all for this episode of the Sportsman Untitled, and we'll see you next time.